But if you start like taking a sort of a bird-eye view of the system, you will see that actually at this sort of large-scale view of the system, things actually start to make sense. Everything that is very disorganized at the local systems start to organize itself at larger scales. And this idea that the organization of the colony emerges from these seemingly random interactions at the local level is what we call swarm intelligence. The idea that we are all stupid as individuals, and then when we start bumping into each other, something beautiful emerges out of it, though not always. We might talk about this after we fail a lot at it.
I've heard you say swarm stupidity.
Swarm stupidity is a real thing.
Yeah, human beings have kind of swarm stupidity.
Yeah, it's amazing how like these little guys have what, like 300,000 neurons, something like this in this. This is like something like 300,000 times less than us.
Right.
We have like about 90 billion, give or take.
Actually,
And these guys are smarter and better at organizing their collective activities that we, with our big brains, are capable of doing.
no,
in a
they're
lot of
largely
situations.
blind, right?
No.
No,
Not
not
all.
most ants. There are some ants that are. And
This-
interestingly, like coming off this idea of like having so few neurons and having these really complex behaviors, for a long time, neuroscientists had hypothesized like what's the smallest you can make a brain. So it's this idea of brain miniaturization, that at some point you can't have enough neurons in that area to actually do anything intelligent or organized. And in all cases, ants break those rules. You can make mathematical models that tell you how small something should get and not be able to function, and yet you can have a highly organized ant colony that's able to pull it off. So
Isn't
no
it-
individual has it, but as a colony as a whole, they do.
Right, so each individual is myopic cognitively. No individual can see the whole organization, but they're like brain cells or neurons, and collectively they form this organization. So I know, Corey, that you showed that ants were much older as an animal than, do we call insects animals? I'm not good at my biology terminology.
I just wanted to say that made me so proud, because I hate when people say that insects aren't animals, because they are.
And you showed that they are how old?
So we believe that modern day ants are probably about 140 million years old. So that means that they were running around biting the toes of dinosaurs, watched them go extinct and continued on. And they are both ecologically and numerically one of the most dominant groups of animals on the
Like,
planet.
how many species of ants are there?
There are about 15,000 species that have names by scientists.
Is
But
there
there's-
any animal with that many species?
Beetles have a lot more, but there are more ant species than all the birds and mammals added together. Just ants. That's not talking about insects.
Right. So I understand that they evolved, from reading some of your work, along with flowering plants. So there's a real symbiosis between the ants and the plant matter, the vegetation that they were responding to. Have you ever heard that some ants, once they eat the enzymes of a certain tree, are compelled to protect that particular tree?
Yes, I've actually worked on that group of ants. I'm glad you asked. So those are the acacia ants. So we haven't done the work on the physiology of diet and how that manipulates the hosts. But what we've done is we've gone in and done a whole bunch of genomic sequencing to understand how, when you engage in an obligate mutualism, how it may shape your genome. So we've known for a long time that to engage in a mutualism, you probably have genes that change. So we know that your genome may change in relation to your behavior. But what we did is the flip. We showed how your behavior alters your genome. And we did that in that group of ants that actually had this obligate symbiosis with these plants. So in this case, the ants defend the plants from all herbivores, encroaching vegetation, pathogenic fungi, everything. And in return, those plants actually provide nesting space and food for the ants. So they never can live anywhere else except on those plants. And those plants have de-invested in all their kinds of defense, and they can only live with the ants.
So we're going to talk about the superorganism of the ant colony, but we should, in the back of our minds, be thinking about the superorganism of the entire ecology, right? Because the genome is evolving, co-evolving together. So you can't talk about ants and not talk about eusociality, this idea of this altruistic social evolution, which seems to defy the kind of traditional Darwinian theory, which is reproduce, reproduce, reproduce. And in ant colonies, it's only the queen he reproduces, and all ants are social. Is that right? There are no solitary ants. So E.O. Wilson, you can't also mention ants and not mention E.O., said that eusociality was one of the greatest innovations in the history of life. And he was your PhD advisor, is that right?
He was one of my advisors.
So what is so interesting about this altruism in terms of evolution? What's so odd about it?
So I guess from the standpoint of being an evolutionary biologist, I mean, the only reason we exist is to propel our genes into the next generation. That's the drive behind almost any organism, right? Now, whether we're sexual or asexual, what we want to do is to make sure our genes are around into the future. And in the case of eusocial organisms, what you have is most individuals defer the right to reproduce. So all those workers you saw running around in those videos cannot reproduce. Their only job is to help maintain the colony so that the queen can reproduce. All of those are sisters, and they're very genetically related. So in fact, by deferring reproduction and being all females, they're more highly genetically related to each other and the offspring that the queen lays than if they laid their eggs themselves.
This is fascinating. We're going to pick this up again, but I want to talk